Atlantis might be the most fascinating lost civilization in human history. Or maybe it never existed at all, and yet it became one of the most powerful legends ever placed inside the human imagination. So, could Atlantis really have existed? Or is this story simply a reflection of humanity's obsession with lost paradises, drowned civilizations, and forgotten worlds filled with secrets? Today, we are going to follow the trail of the most famous lost land on Earth, from legend to history, from history to archaeology, and from archaeology to the dark and mesmerizing depths of human imagination. And at the end of this journey, we will return to one question. Could Atlantis really have existed? Or do we keep believing in it because we desperately want it to be real? When most people hear the name Atlantis, the same image appears in their minds. Massive temples beneath the sea, perfect columns, palaces covered in gold, a silent civilization waiting in the blue darkness of the ocean. It feels as if humanity once built something extraordinary, and then lost it all in a single terrible night. That idea alone is powerful. Because Atlantis is not just a city. Atlantis is the idea of lost greatness. It is the fall of something once magnificent. It is the symbol of a civilization destroyed by its own pride. And maybe that is exactly why people have never stopped searching for it. Some looked for Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean. Some searched in the Mediterranean. Some placed it near Santorini. Others connected it to Crete. Some tried to find it near the coast of Spain. And others pushed the legend even further, claiming Atlantis was hidden under ice, buried beneath deserts, or scattered in pieces across the world. But like every great legend, we have to begin with the most important question. Where did the story of Atlantis come from? The first and most important known source for Atlantis is the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Yes. Almost everything we think we know about Atlantis comes from one man, Plato, around 2,400 years ago. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato described Atlantis in remarkable detail. According to him, Atlantis was a great and powerful island civilization located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which is usually understood as a reference to the area beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. It was rich. It was fertile. It had enormous resources. It possessed a powerful navy. It built magnificent structures. It had harbors, canals, palaces, and a carefully planned urban design. Plato even describes the central city as being arranged in rings of land and water, almost as if it were too perfect to be real. Atlantis was presented not merely as strong, but as astonishingly advanced and highly organized. But the most striking part of the story was not its beauty. It was its downfall. According to Plato, the people of Atlantis gradually became morally corrupt. Power changed them. Wealth spoiled them. Their pride grew. Their hunger for dominance expanded. And in the end, they drew the anger of the gods. Great earthquakes and floods struck the land. And Atlantis, in a single terrible day and night, sank beneath the sea. This is the moment that captured human imagination for centuries. Because the story was never only about a lost place. It was about rise and collapse, glory and punishment, prosperity and catastrophe. It was a warning wrapped in grandeur. It was a civilization standing at the very peak of its power, only to vanish almost instantly. And that makes the story unforgettable. But this is also the exact moment where doubt begins. Because the man telling the story was not a historian. He was a philosopher. And not just any philosopher, but one who frequently used stories, symbols, and invented scenarios to explore morality, politics, and the nature of human society. That is why so many scholars ask a crucial question. Was Plato describing a real lost civilization? Or was he creating a philosophical lesson about the dangers of arrogance and corruption? To understand that, we have to look at how Plato uses Atlantis inside the story. Atlantis is not simply an exotic island. It functions as the opposite of an ideal society. On one side, Plato places an older, disciplined, virtuous version of Athens. On the other side, Atlantis appears as rich, powerful, and morally decayed. So while the story seems to describe a conflict between two civilizations, it may actually be presenting a conflict between two moral systems. On one side, restraint. On the other side, excess. On one side, balance. On the other side, pride. This is one of the main reasons many scholars believe Atlantis was never meant to be read as literal history. They see it as a philosophical allegory. In other words, Plato may not have been trying to preserve the memory of a real empire. He may have been saying something much larger. Power can corrupt. Wealth can blind. And a civilization may collapse not because of enemies outside its walls, but because of rot growing inside it. That interpretation is strong. Very strong. But human curiosity does not stop there. Because throughout history, many legends were not entirely invented. Some were exaggerated. Some were reshaped. Some were transformed over generations. But deep inside them, there may still have been a real event, a real disaster, or a real place. And that idea is what keeps Atlantis alive. Maybe Plato did not invent everything from nothing. Maybe he was inspired by older memories. Maybe there was some historical core, hidden beneath the layers of myth and philosophy. So what could that core have been? This is where one of the most famous theories enters the discussion. The Santorini and Minoan civilization theory. Imagine a highly sophisticated Bronze Age maritime culture in the Aegean world. The Minoans. They built impressive centers, traded across the seas, produced art of extraordinary beauty, and developed a complex society connected to islands and maritime routes. Their world was vibrant. Their architecture was advanced. Their influence was real. Then came disaster. On the island of Santorini, known in ancient times as Thera, a massive volcanic eruption took place. It is considered one of the most destructive natural events of the Bronze Age. The eruption did not simply damage one island. It triggered earthquakes. It likely caused tsunamis. It changed landscapes. It sent shockwaves through nearby regions, and it may have weakened or destabilized parts of the Minoan world. Now when people compare this to Atlantis, the attraction is obvious. An advanced island-linked civilization. Sudden devastation. The sea playing a major role in destruction. A once flourishing world interrupted by catastrophe. Santorini itself, with its dramatic volcanic caldera, still looks like the scar of an ancient disaster. Even today, it stimulates imagination. People stand there and feel that something enormous once happened. Archaeological sites such as Akrotiri strengthen that feeling. Because in those ruins, we really do see the remains of an advanced Bronze Age settlement. Frescoes, planned buildings, evidence of daily life, art, structure, order. It feels like a world frozen at the edge of destruction. And that is exactly why some researchers and enthusiasts suggest that Atlantis may have been inspired by distant cultural memories of disasters like this. Maybe Plato inherited fragments of old stories. Maybe memories of volcanic destruction, flooding, and the decline of maritime cultures survived for generations, changing shape each time they were retold. Maybe he took those fragments and transformed them into a grand philosophical narrative. At first glance, this sounds compelling. In fact, it sounds almost perfect. But there are serious problems with this theory. The first problem is chronology. Plato places Atlantis thousands of years before his own time, and the number often associated with the story is around 9,000 years before Solon, that is vastly earlier than the volcanic eruption of Santorini. The dates do not match well. The second problem is location. Plato places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, usually understood as beyond Gibraltar, pointing outward toward the Atlantic. Santorini lies inside the Mediterranean. That is a major difference. The third problem is direct evidence. Yes, Santorini experienced catastrophe. Yes, the Minoan world was real and advanced. Yes, the parallels are intriguing. But there is no direct archaeological proof that lets us say with confidence, Atlantis equals Santorini. The theory is interesting. It may explain inspiration, but it does not prove identity. And this is where one of the biggest mistakes in the Atlantis discussion becomes clear. People often confuse possibility with proof. Something can sound plausible without being demonstrated. Something can fit emotionally, symbolically, or visually, and still remain unproven. Atlantis debates often live in that exact space. Strong possibilities, impressive similarities, fascinating gaps, but not enough certainty to close the case. So what do those who believe Atlantis was entirely fictional say? Their argument is simple. Looking for Atlantis on a map may be like looking for a moral lesson inside a geography book, only in reverse. They argue that Plato created Atlantis as a literary and philosophical device. Its purpose was not to report history, but to illustrate the consequences of greed, pride, imperial ambition, and moral decay. From this perspective, Atlantis is not a place we are supposed to find. It is a warning we are supposed to understand. That interpretation has serious weight. First, Plato is the main source. There are no strong, independent ancient records that clearly confirm Atlantis as a real empire in the way he describes it. Second, the structure of the story feels deeply symbolic. The perfect urban rings, the overwhelming wealth, the moral corruption, the divine punishment. These do not read like neutral historical notes. They read like carefully arranged themes. Third, Plato often uses constructed examples to explore broader truths. So reading Atlantis as part of that method makes sense. And yet, for many people, that still does not fully satisfy the mystery. Because Atlantis is not just a debate about texts. It is a dream. A human dream. Why are we so captivated by lost cities? Why do drowned worlds pull at the imagination with such force? Maybe because the idea of a forgotten golden age is deeply seductive. Maybe because ruins beneath water exist at the border between what can be seen and what can no longer be touched. Maybe because submerged civilizations embody the brutality of time in a way that few other images can. Or maybe because Atlantis whispers something to us that is difficult to ignore. Great civilizations existed before us. They, too, may have believed they were unstoppable. And then they vanished. That thought is disturbing. Because when we tell the story of Atlantis, we are not only talking about the past. We are also talking about ourselves. Our own cities. Our own technology. Our own ambition. Our own vulnerability. Think about the world we live in now. We build skyscrapers. We map the ocean floor. We send machines into space. We surround ourselves with digital systems and global networks. And still, a single disaster, a single war, a single environmental collapse, a single cascading crisis can remind us how fragile civilization really is. That is why Atlantis does not feel ancient in a dead way. It feels current. It feels like a mirror. It feels like a warning from far away, and also from directly ahead. So when we return to the main question, could Atlantis really have existed? We have to answer with honesty. There is no solid archaeological evidence proving that Plato's Atlantis existed exactly as he described it. No confirmed ruined capital city has been found that ends the debate. No discovered palace beneath the sea has forced historians to rewrite everything. Neither in the Atlantic, nor in the Mediterranean, nor in any other region has a conclusive discovery appeared that settles the matter once and for all. So from a scientific and historical standpoint, the safest answer is this. There is no proof that Plato's Atlantis was a literal historical empire. But the discussion does not entirely end there, because another question still remains. Could Plato's story have been inspired by real events? That possibility is harder to dismiss completely. Throughout history, memories of disasters have often survived not as neat historical records, but as myths, legends, sacred stories, and symbolic narratives. Coastlines changed. Settlements disappeared. Earthquakes shattered communities. Tsunamis struck without warning. Volcanoes erased entire landscapes. People living through such events do not always preserve them as dry facts. They preserve them as stories. Stories grow. Stories change. Stories absorb meaning. And over generations, a real catastrophe can become something larger than itself. In that sense, Atlantis may not need to have been a single place in order to contain something real. It may have been a fusion of memories, a symbolic reconstruction of multiple disasters, a legend formed at the intersection of trauma, imagination, and philosophy. Maybe the destruction of island cultures in the Aegean played a role. Maybe ancient Egyptian stories contributed something. Maybe coastal flooding in other parts of the world left an imprint on the collective imagination. Maybe over centuries, fragments of different events merged into one unforgettable image. Not a perfect record, but not pure invention either. That possibility cannot be proven easily, but it also cannot be ruled out with total certainty. And this is perhaps where Atlantis becomes even more interesting. Because if it is not a literal city, then what is it? Maybe Atlantis is a memory of collapse. Maybe it is the name given to the fear that no civilization lasts forever. Maybe it is the story humanity tells when trying to make sense of greatness destroyed by its own excess. Many more dramatic theories have also been proposed over time. Some claim Atlantis was near Spain. Some connect it to North Africa. Some place it in Atlantic islands. Others push the story into far stranger territory, linking Atlantis to hidden ancient technologies, secret wisdom, lost super civilizations, or even extraterrestrial contact. But most of those theories suffer from the same weakness. They begin with belief, and then search for supporting pieces. That is the opposite of careful investigation. Good research gathers evidence first, then draws conclusions. Atlantis theories often do the reverse. People want Atlantis to be real. And once that desire becomes strong enough, almost any underwater structure, strange map, or ancient disaster can be pulled into the legend. That is the power of myth. Some stories are so irresistible that people do not merely want to hear them. They want to prove them. Atlantis is exactly that kind of story. And that is why popular culture never let it die. Atlantis appears again and again in novels, films, documentaries, comics, games, conspiracies, and speculative histories. Sometimes it is portrayed as a city of advanced technology. Sometimes as the cradle of forbidden wisdom. Sometimes as the source of lost human knowledge. Sometimes as a mystical civilization waiting to rise again. But notice something important. The less concrete proof there is, the more space imagination gains. Mystery expands where certainty ends. And Atlantis is built from mystery. It survives because it is not fully solved. It survives because it exists in that perfect zone between maybe and never. So what is the most reasonable conclusion? Perhaps it is best to think in two stages. First, Plato's Atlantis was most likely not a straightforward historical report. The themes inside the story strongly suggest symbolism, philosophy, and moral warning. Second, that does not necessarily mean the story was created from absolute emptiness. There may be real historical echoes behind it. Echoes of volcanic destruction. Echoes of drowned coastlines. Echoes of collapsing maritime cultures. Echoes of old stories passed from one generation to another until memory and myth became impossible to separate. Seen this way, Atlantis becomes more than a place. It becomes a pattern. Not the name of one city, but the shape of civilization's vulnerability. Not a single island lost in one night, but the idea that greatness can disappear, that prosperity can decay, that pride can invite disaster, and that human beings have always sensed this, even when they wrapped the fear in beautiful stories. Maybe that is why Atlantis still feels alive. It is not alive because we have found it. It is alive because it still speaks to us. It tells us that civilization is powerful, but fragile, brilliant, but temporary, grand, but never invincible. It tells us that collapse does not always come from outside. Sometimes it rises from within. Sometimes the sea that swallows a civilization is not water at all. Sometimes it is pride. Sometimes it is greed. Sometimes it is blindness. So, could Atlantis really have existed? The most honest answer may be this. Not in the exact way Plato described it. At least not according to the evidence we have today. But as a story rooted in real human experiences of catastrophe, loss, and the fall of advanced societies. Yes, that is possible. Atlantis may not have been a literal empire beneath the waves, but it may still contain the memory of real destruction, real fear, real warning. In that sense, Atlantis may be true, not as geography, but as a reflection of history and human nature. Perhaps Atlantis was never one city. Perhaps it was the shadow of many disasters. Perhaps it was not a location, but a lesson. Not a ruin under the ocean, but a message carried across centuries. And maybe that is what makes it immortal. Because cities made of stone can sink. Cities made of ideas do not vanish so easily. They survive in questions. They survive in stories. They survive in the part of the human mind that cannot resist asking, what if? What if there really was a world that rose to greatness and then collapsed in a single violent turning point? What if all our confidence, all our power, all our systems could fail faster than we imagine? What if Atlantis is not only about the past, but about every civilization that believes it is beyond collapse? That may be the deepest reason the legend still matters. Atlantis is not just a lost island. It is one of humanity's oldest mirrors. We look into it, and we do not only search for ancient ruins. We search for ourselves. We search for proof that greatness can disappear. We search for warnings hidden in beauty. We search for the line between memory and myth. And perhaps that is why Atlantis never truly vanished. Because whether it existed as a real place or not, it exists as an idea powerful enough to outlive empires. So maybe the final question is not simply, where was Atlantis? Maybe the real question is, why do we need Atlantis so badly? Why do we return to it again and again? Why do we still imagine towers beneath the waves and golden halls in the dark? Perhaps because Atlantis gives shape to one of our deepest fears, that everything we build can be lost. And perhaps it also gives shape to one of our deepest hopes, that even when worlds vanish, their memory can survive. Atlantis may never be proven in the form the legend gives us, but the legend itself is real. Its influence is real. Its warning is real. Its hold on the human imagination is real. And maybe that is enough to explain why, after thousands of years, we still speak its name with the same mixture of wonder and unease. Atlantis, the city that may never have existed. The legend that refused to die. The lost world that still rises again and again in the depths of the human mind.